Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure. I'm coming from Modena. Modena, it's in the north of Italy, very close to Bologna, not far from Venice, and Milan is here, and Florence is here. It's a very good base for moving around very nice places. Modena is a small city, only 180,000 people, but we are famous in the world for a few things that you can see here. Balsamic vinegar from Modena, Ferrari cars, not only Ferrari, we have also Maserati, and Luciano Pavarotti, the singer, the opera singer, was from Modena. And this little town has a very nice feature that I want to show you. It's actually like a little Pompeii. Wherever we dig for other purposes, we always found some Roman remains, and they are very well preserved. In Pompeii, they have been here. They have been covered, as you know, by volcanic sediments, volcanic ashes, and pyroclastic flows. In Modena, the remains are covered by alluvial, fluvial sediments. And our center, the main square that you can see here, it's a UNESCO site. It's a World Heritage in the World Heritage list since 1997, because it's a masterpiece of Romanesque art. You can see here the cathedral and the tower. We have beautiful sculptures, and we know when the cathedral started. The construction started 1099. We don't know exactly when they finished, but we are starting to have some ideas. And the tower, the bell tower, we don't know exactly when it did start, but we know exactly when it's finished, 1319. It's reasonable to think that the two buildings were founded together, but we don't have the documents talking about the tower. Documents are talking only about the cathedral, and we lost a great part of the documents because of fires and other problems. And we know now that the 1099 is also the timing for the beginning of the construction of the tower, because we are doing right now some new we are applying a new technique for dating the walls of the ancient monuments. For example, we are dating using carbon-14 the mortars which has been used in the buildings. Instead of taking organic elements which can be together mixed in the mortars, like charcoals or other fragments, plant fragments, for example, we are taking the CO2 from the calcite, which is forming from the setting of the mortar, which is a sample of the atmosphere when the wall was built. And so we had the dating of the base of the tower, and it's very close to 1099. It's right there. So we know that the tower was built together with the cathedral. And this is very important because we will see some strange feature in both the cathedral and the tower, and it's important to say that they started together. Okay, this way. Modena is a town made out of bricks. Most of the monuments, this is at the town hall, most of the monuments are made out of bricks. They can have some decoration with stones, ornamental stones, but most of the buildings are bricks. And only the cathedral and the tower are completely covered by stones. And of course the core of both buildings is bricks, but they want to decorate the external facades with stones. And so we don't have many stones in Modena, stone buildings, and one of the reasons is that ornamental stones that you can take are cropping out at least 20 kilometers away from the city on the northern Apennine side of the of the fluvial plain, the Pope River fluvial plain. But of course, here we are in the middle of the fluvial plain. You can dig and you can find fine-grained sediments, clay, mudstones, that you can use to produce the bricks. So that's why Modena is a town mostly made out of bricks. And in 2006, we had the first problems on the tower and the cathedral. Rock fragments fell down. Fortunately, they didn't hit anybody. And so finally the city had the perception that there was a time to start with the restoration of these two buildings. And at that time we had to climb with ropes because there is no other possibility to reach some of the parts of the tower. And then fortunately we started, there was scaffolding for restoration, but for almost 1 year we used this scaffolding before restoration just to get the information on how to do the restoration. And we will come back to this point later, but now I want to point out the fact that this was the first example in Italy where modern art was covering ancient art. You see, you can imagine the discussion in the city about this. Not everybody liked it, but at the end, when it was up there, this modern art piece, it was kind of impressive, and there was not that much argument as before when the project was shown at first. And you can see the different approach. This is the tower now belongs to the city. It's not belonging to the church. It's a civic tower, but the cathedral is still belonging to the church. And you can see this shiny, very nice covering of the scaffolding. And you can see the other scaffolding here for the church. Nothing on it, just they didn't want to show up anything, and so a very different approach. The restoration, it was not exactly the same, but we were involved as geologists and other professionals in both restorations. First impression that you have while looking at the. Can we switch a little of these front lines? Maybe it will be better. It's here.
Here.
This is 5, 7.
Here's a quick one.
Oh.
Lights. How about? Does that help?
Okay, I think it's
better?
Surely better.
That better?
Yes. And you start to have a feeling. Okay, the building is very tall. It's 90 meters high, almost 300 feet. We have more than 10,000 slabs here and 10,000 in the cathedrals, more than 10,000 in the cathedral. And you can have a feeling immediately that there are many different types of rocks. You can see the different colors, but you can see also that the size of this slab is very different. You can have very large slabs, you can have very small ones, very different shapes also, not only size. And if we take a close look at this area, for example, we see some of the rocks. We start with this one. It's a pinkish, reddish, white to pinkish rock. It's called Ammonitico from Verona. You know Verona very well because of the Romeo and Juliet, for example. And this rock is Jurassic limestone, so that means 175, 145 million years ago. And Verona is right here, Modena is here. So we are a few hundred kilometers away from the city. And it's very famous because of the ammonites, which are in the rock, the fossils. And this is a slab from the tower. I would like to point out that my students made a very detailed catalog of all the fossils which are in the tower and the cathedral. So we have a complete catalog, and we consider these monuments as a natural history museum, open air. It's really impressive. And then we have this other gray stone with very large slabs. It's Aurisina. This place is even further away. It's very close to the border with Slovenia, and you can imagine how far it is, a few hundred kilometers. And it's Cretaceous limestones, 165 million years ago. And it's very typical because of this fossil. It's a rudist, a bivalve, and it's very typical. It's extinct right now. It doesn't exist anymore. It's very typical because instead of being like the bivalves that we know very well, one shell, it's a cone shape, and the other one was a kind of lid to protect the animal living inside. And we have another one. This is from Vicenza. It's the yellowish one, and it's coming from this area. Eocene, Oligocene, 56 to 28 million years ago. These rocks are kind of soft, very easy to carve, and that's the reason why the Romans were using it for example, this lion is coming from a funerary monument, Roman funerary monuments, and it's been used in front of the cathedral together with another one. And it's beautiful nummullite. These are forams, extinct forams inside, and we have corals inside. And it is also a huge oyster here that I didn't show in the picture, which is very similar to your oyster here on the coast. And we finish with this rock. The only magmatic rock that we have, it's a trachyte. It's the most dark one, the darkest one that we have. It's coming from Padua, very close to Padua here. Oligocene, 32 million years ago. And this is spectacular outcrops of these magmatic rocks, which during the solidification they form these typical columnar cracks. So we ended up having a map of the 4 facades of the tower, and we found out 21 different types of stones, not only the 4 that I show you, 21 different types. And this is very amazing. This is amazing. And we think, I'm still checking this information, we think that this is the monument which has the largest number of stones at the exterior part in the world, because we couldn't up to now find any other monuments with such an incredible amount of stones outside. Of course, inside you can have as many as you want, but outside this is not an obvious observation that we have so many different types of stones. And we have already an idea, you probably got already an idea. We see so many different types of stones, different size, different shape. Some are a kind of prevailing. For example, this the 4th floor here we have only one type. From here going to the top we have only one type. Down here we have a kind of mixture of all the types that we know. So this is a kind of very interesting information that we can get, and we will come back later to this. But the idea is that obviously the stones were not quarried to be used in this monument. They are coming from previous monuments because they're very different, and they're very the shape is different. And we have a few documents which are telling us this. For example, 1099, when they started to build, the protector of the city, San Gimignano, you are inspiring man and tell them where to dig to the ground to find large amount of stones. And we have also, in different time, license to dig stones, which were awarded to the people for the construction of the buildings. So they're coming from other previous monuments. And if we dig, anywhere we dig, we can find some remains of Roman stones. These stones were Romans. And for example, in the Necropolis, this is a necropolis which is along this main road. We have these funerary monuments. And this is the reconstruction, because the Romans were burying their dead in those necropolis, but they were located along the main streets outside the city walls, not inside. So as you can see here, we can have very different type of monuments. They can be very large. They were very large or very small, depending, of course, on the economic possibilities of the family. And this is what we know, but we had, for the first time, the archaeological evidence of this despoliation, despoliation of ancient monuments. For example, here you can see this is a 5 meter deep cut, which is very close to our new geology department, by the way. It's a few hundreds meters away. You can see here there's this is the level of the Roman necropolis, which dates back the 1st century before Christ to 2nd century after Christ. Here we see a sequence of mudstone, and down back here we see a different color. We see that it's wet sediment. This is sand, and then again fine-grained sediment up here, mudstone. We have stones lying along this level, and stones down here, the necropolis. And these stones are coming from this level. So we dated this level. This is the 6th century after Christ. And they were digging here holes when this was the ground where they were walking. They were digging all to get the stones from this level, and they were taking them away to the city. If we look close to this level, and we see some of the funerary stele still in place like this, we can recognize that some of these stones were sticking out from the ground, probably in the grass. They were visible. So it's not only that the sand was inspiring men and tell them where to dig, but they could even stumble in some of these stones, and they were able to find them, at least during the 2nd century. And then something happened. There is sand up here. So we have a very nice story here. We have mud here, laminated mud with convolution. And up here we have sand with this beautiful structure. These are sand ripples. And they are telling us that there was a current going from the left to the right. So we have two types of sediments, and we can reconstruct what happened here during the centuries. And we have a modern analog for that, because just 2 years ago we had a flood. So the idea is that there was a Roman necropolis with tombstones like this, and there were floods covering partially some of these stones. And then the 6th century they went there and they started to dig to get the stones away. But there was a very dramatic flood which carried a lot of sand here, and it completely covered those stones. So when they went back after the floods, they couldn't even recognize the place because it was completely covered by new sand. And this is what we have today, 5 meters of sediments in less than 2,000 years. So I was mentioning we have a modern analog for this. 2 years ago, this levee of the river close to Modena collapsed, and this is not, it's a kind of unusual because the collapse happened here in a very straight part of the river. Normally this happens where you have curves, bends, and here the reason is that there were animals digging tunnels into the levee. For example, foxes. We know that they are digging holes in the levee, and now of course everything has been changed. Trying to control these animals, which are back. That there were not so many before, and now they're back, and they are digging very, very impressive holes into the levees. So the levee collapsed, and this area was flooded. We are a little north of Modena, so the city was not flooded, but small villages around, just north of Modena, were flooded. And one person died in this with this flood. And if we take a look, this is the levee, and this is the collapse area that we saw before. And here, just 200 meters, 300 meters away from the levee, we have this beautiful sand with ripple marks, which are exactly the same that we have seen in the Necropolis. And these here, in only 3 days, because it took 3 days to close the gap in the levee. In only 3 days, we had the deposition of 1 meter of sand. If we move 8 kilometers away from the levee, which collapsed, after 1 week, the area was still flooded, and we can see that the correlative sediment, the sediment that we can correlate with 1 meter of sand, close to the breaking point, it's only 4 millimeter, 3 to 4 millimeters of mud. So these are very similar to the mud laminae that we have seen at the bottom of the below the sand in the Necropolis. So more close to the city, we have another example of that Modena can be considered as a Pompeii. Here they were building an underground parking plot, which was huge, complete, very, very large. And here we can see the mud, exactly very similar to the mud that we have seen during the flood. So that means that this is mud coming from floods, which were located a kind of away, a few kilometers away from the city, and not very close to the breaking of the levee. And we can see Roman amphorae. There's a channel here, artificial channel, and many Roman remains. In this place, we were able to recover hundreds of Roman amphorae. Really impressive. But the most spectacular finding was this road. This is, you see, 5 meters below the ground. This is another university building here, ancient university building. 5 meters below the ground, we found this Roman road, perfectly preserved. And you can see where the chariots were passing through, and the Roman town was founded 183 before Christ. So next year, 2017, we are celebrating 2,200 years of the city. So there will be a big celebration in town. And here in the concrete wall, which of course has been put here to protect the shoulder of the excavation to prevent collapse. We can see that there are areas which are sticking out from the wall. So the concrete was a kind of passing through the sediment. And here we can recognize this was possible just because here there was a sand layer, which is correlating exactly with the one that we have seen on the other part of the city covering the necropolis. So we have mud below, and we are in a floodplain setting like today, and we have sand here, this crevasse splay created by a flood, a very important flood, and then again mud here. So this was a flood which was very close to the city, and when we have the mud, the floods reached the city, but the breaking point was far enough, a few kilometers possibly from the city. And so what to do with this beautiful road? They had to construct a underground a parking lot, and you can see this is really striking. You can see the roots worn by the wheels in the stones. It's really amazing. So this is a kind of reconstruction of the situation at that time. What to do with this road? The construction didn't stop, and the idea was, okay, let's create an archaeological park. We take the road from here, stone by stone, and we just put it on top of the parking lot. And this is the operation, the putting back the stones exactly in the same position. And now you can walk on the Roman road right now. It's really a beautiful park, archaeological park right now. And here you can see the stratigraphy. Of course, we don't have only Roman layers. We found remains from Iron Age, any kind of Middle Age, and a kind of more recent remains up here. And if we move closer to the city, that road was not into the city. It was outside the city. And the inner part of the city is locating very close to the downtown. And here, for example, you can see this is the remain of the wall, Roman wall, which protected the city. And it's dating back to the 2nd century before Christ. And this is amazing wall. It was up to 4 meters high, and it was 2 meters wide. Really powerful example. Oh, by the way, this is the Duke Palace, which is dating back to 1634, an example of Baroque art. And you can see here the Roman city. It's a square, like the Roman like to do that, a square with a wall. And a modern city, Middle Age city, is sitting a kind of is not sitting directly on top of the ancient Roman city. The reason is that during the 6th century there were many floods in the area, and the people moved from here and they went to higher grounds. And then when these floods stopped, they came back in the same position, and they built a new city. But you see, it's not exactly the same place, because the Roman town was almost completely buried already. Okay, so if we go back to the tower, now we know that all these rocks that we see here were used by the Romans. So they were digging while they were constructing the tower and the cathedral, looking for ancient stone, ancient monuments, destroy them, take the stone, and then use them for the building. But there was a moment where they stopped digging, and of course you can imagine that the supply of stones could not be continuous, because not always you were lucky to find the stones. And we have a few documents saying that they had to stop the construction of the cathedral and the tower because they didn't have any stone to go on with the construction. But just because we did this geological survey, we discovered the moment history of the city where they had the possibility, instead of digging and possibly not finding anything, they had the possibility to start to buy stones from Verona. And you can see here, these stones were carved to build the tower, because they have all the same shape. They have the same shape, and the slab have the same shape, and just the same type of rocks. So just by doing this geological survey, we were able to tell that possibly around 1240 the city entered in a time of prosperity which was not there before. So geology is kind of helping in reconstructing the story of the city, the history of the city. And other very interesting points are, for example, here we see this third floor, we see many, all the type of stones are there, very different. Here we see almost one single type, and here kind of mixture, but not as diverse as here. And since now, whenever we found stones, whenever we found remains, we are jumping immediately there and analyzing the stones, we were able to tell that this floor is really similar in the proportion among the different stones, which are mostly three, are very similar to the necropolis that I showed you before along the main road. So it's when they were constructing this floor, they were possibly exploiting a necropolis which was very similar to the one that I show you. We don't know exactly where this necropolis was, but it's only taking stones from a necropolis that you can have different type of stones, because the necropolises were long-standing, and every family was buying different stones. Some of them were more expensive, some were less expensive. So we have an idea of what they were digging at that time. But despoliation was not so widespread as we would have thought, because 2007 we discovered this monument, and again this was they were digging to build a new house here, and you can see that this monument is very tall. We are 5.5 meters below the ground, and this is 4 meters. So you can imagine that it was sticking out. It was buried progressively, but it was sticking out until a few centuries ago. And so they were desperate looking for rocks, for stones, but they didn't destroy this particular monument. And we don't know exactly why, but we like to think that there could be a reason. When this building, with this monument was found, everybody in the city fell in love with the story, which is told here. Vitalia, it does say here that Vitalia, the name of the woman, she was a slave, and she was liberated by the man, and she married the man who was her former master. And and he was a rich and powerful man, and they had a son together, and he was as well originally a slave. And both of them were liberated by the former master, and the former master was the father of the son, of the baby. And then the son, we know from what is written here that the son became a very important officer as well. So one possible idea is that not only the city fell in love in 2007 when this monument was discovered with Vitalia, but maybe this story was keeping safe this monument, and they didn't touch it. We don't know the reason, but maybe this could be the reason why they didn't destroy it to get the stones. And when this monument was discovered, it was taken to the museum, the Archeological Museum in Modena, but the national government said, okay, you take it to the museum, but we want you to put a copy in very close to the place where this monument was found. And we did the identification of the stones, and the idea was to build the copy in resin or plastic. And since we did the identification of the stones, we went to the local government and said, look, why don't we just buy it, create a copy using the same stones? This would be a very nice exercise. And the price to do this was almost the same. It's very surprising. I didn't know about that. But the price to do that in natural stones was more or less the same. So the idea was accepted. So we went around looking for these stones. This is coming from Verona, both of them from Verona, so not that far. But this one, the Procrunesian marble, it's coming from Turkey. It's coming from Turkey, from the Marmara Island here, not very far from Istanbul, so thousands of kilometers to reach this little small town in Modena. And of course, you know that we have a very famous marble in Italy. It's Carrara marble, and it's coming from this area here. And when the Carrara marble was discovered during the Roman time, they stopped using this Marmara marble, and the Carrara marble became the most famous and most used marble in Italy. And so at that time it was a kind of cheap marble because it was traveling mostly by waterways, because the quarries, like as you can see here, they were directly on the seaside, and it was very easy to cut the stones and put them directly on the navis lapidaria, like this one, and bring it anywhere in the empire, Roman Empire. And we have an example of a wreckage right here of one of the largest ship, Roman ship that were discovered, 40 meters long, 14 meters wide, the 3rd century after Christ, 350 tons of Procrunesian marble for Turkey. You can see here the blocks. This was a huge ship, really impressive. And so we did a laser scanner model of the monuments, and it was reproduced by a machine, a cutting machine, and controlled by a computer and finished by a professional sculptor. And this is the copy. And there's a nice story about this marble. When we wrote a letter to a quarryman in Turkey saying, look, we need one of your block to make a copy of these monuments of this slave who was liberated by her master, and they had a son together, so he was very happy about this. A very nice story. But when we told him that this was going to be the block marble coming back to Italy after 2,000 years, because no other blocks of this marble were used in Italy after the discovery of the Carrara marble, he was so happy that he gave us the block for free. So this is another nice story. Okay, so looking at the stones now, here you can see the survey also of the cathedral. We can play some stratigraphy and correlations, especially using the tower as a reference, because the tower is vertical, and we know exactly that these parts are younger than these parts. This is not so obvious for the cathedral because we don't know exactly how they did build the cathedral. We know that during the Middle Age, they always, as a tradition, started from the back, from the apsis, to build, and they then were constructed the other parts. But we don't know exactly what was the part that they finished with. But we can do obvious correlation here. For example, you see the red part, which is in the cathedral is here. So we can correlate these two parts in the constructions. You see some other reds here that because they were later restoration in the tower and they were using this type of stones. And we can see also, for example, here this green part, it's a kind of also here, a lot of green here and this side. So we may think that this part may correlate, and to have, that means that at that time they had the possibility to use, they found a large amount of these green stones to be used. And as we said for the necropolis may have many different types of stones, but to have a single stone for a large building, that means that the building was a public building. So there is a possibility that when they did construct this part and those parts in the cathedral, they were exploiting a large public building, which normally it was built using only one type of stones. And we come back to this later. If we look at the map of the town, we can have an idea where there must have been possible a very large public building. You can go a little closer. You can see here, this is the cathedral, this is the tower. You see the shadow of the tower here. It's the main square. And you can see that there is an area which is a kind of strange shape. This shape, which really looks like, we know that this was the area where the Roman amphitheater was. Here we see the example, the most famous example, the Colosseum in Rome, which dates back to 80 after Christ. And it's very famous because, of course, the gladiators were fighting in the amphitheater. And here you can see this is the outer part, which is still preserved. But if you turn around, you see this part, it's been taken away. The outer ring is missing because there was a time where the Colosseum itself was used as a quarry to build other buildings. And this we can imagine it happened also for the Roman amphitheater, which was located right here. It was not as big as, of course, the Colosseum in Rome, but 15 to 16,000 people could sit directly here. So this is only an hypothesis. We cannot go and dig here because you can imagine it's right in the middle of the city. This is just an hypothesis. And we have another interesting stones, which is coming from the town hall, not from the cathedral. During the restoration, we discovered right here a beautiful example of red granite. It's very beautiful. And we did the analysis of this red granite, and we discovered it's coming from Aswan in Egypt. So this is coming from very far away. And it's the oldest rock that we have in our city, 606 million years ago. And if we go to Aswan, not go to Aswan, we take a look using satellite images. We see the modern city, Aswan. We see the Nile here. And we see an area here which is kind of nice features. We get a little closer. We see some scars and this outcrop, and we see a very distinct feature right here. This is a beautiful example. This was obelisk, Egyptian obelisk, and unfinished. It was going to be the largest, the tallest Egyptian obelisk because it is 42 meters tall. And you look at the weight, 1,168 tons. It's really amazing. And it is unfinished. They didn't take it away. They didn't carry it away from here because it cracked. You can see the crack here just at the last moment. It was already finished and it cracked, so they left it there. And the stones that we have there, it's coming from the same type of rock from Aswan. We see some of these obelisks in other parts of Europe, and there is, I think, one here, United States, New York, and this beautiful rock, reused Egyptian obelisk. And so this is Modena, and this is Aswan. You see, all over here, thousands of kilometers away, the most exotic and old stone that we have. So this is all the stones we have seen. They're mostly coming from the north and the east, and from Greece and from Egypt. I didn't talk about the other marbles which are coming from Greece, but we talk only about one type coming from Turkey. You don't see many. The Northern Apennines is very close, but the Romans didn't take stones from the Northern Apennine because we have mostly sandstones there, and those sandstones are not very well cemented. So the Romans didn't like to use those because they were easily weathered, and they just didn't take them. Okay, so we finished looking back to the cathedral, and I don't know if you can see this. There is an asymmetry in the facade of the cathedral, which was a kind of neglected up to now, and we discovered that this is the key to understand how they built the cathedral. I don't know if you can see this asymmetry. I can point it out for you. Here you see this cornice going this way, and you can see that this cornice is higher than the other one. And there's a difference of 28, almost 30 centimeter between these 2 points. So this was kind of neglected. Well, what is the reason for that? Did they make a mistake? It's very difficult to think that they did a mistake here because they were very skilled. And this is an obvious asymmetry that we have in the facade. So after we did our survey, one of my friend architect came out with a very nice idea to explain this type of mistake. Here we have the tower, and you see that the tower is leaning, and the reason for the tower leaning is that we have mudstone, we have clays down here in the ground that I show you, and they are deformed by the weight of the tower, but not only by the weight of the tower, and so that's why the tower is leaning, but also the cathedral is leaning. The tower is leaning toward the cathedral is leaning toward the tower. Why? Because of course when we have 2 large buildings, the most deformation is in between the 2, because that's the area which is getting the weight from both parts. And so to explain this difference in the 2 parts of the cathedral, we may think that they start building the cathedral from the apsis, and this was the tradition, and they continue to build on both sides, and they were closing the construction at the very front. Why do we think that? It's a very wonderful idea. We have the cathedral here, the tower here. The tower starts to lean immediately during the construction, and the cathedral starts immediately leaning toward the tower as well. So what they did was keeping this distance, the cornice from the ground on this side and also from this side. So they were keeping exactly the same distance from the ground. But the problem is that here the ground went down because of this deformation which was created by the tower and by the apsis. And when they arrived here, this side was lower than this side. And so they had this kind of mistake, which was not a mistake because they were correct in measuring the distance. So you can imagine, well, we try to imagine what happened when they were building and they discovered this horrible mistake. And we can imagine the shouting by the architect and by the people there. And so the point is, what are we going to do? Are we going to tear down the building and start again to a new construction? Well, one possibility is, what the idea was, let's try to hide the mistake. And they create a new architectural element. Our friends, art historians, they went back to the documents and they discovered that this kind of architectural element, which is called protirum, it's a kind of porch in the front, did not exist before the construction of this cathedral. And they just put it there to hide this mistake, because normally at that time they were just, closing directly in the front. And so since then, this architectural element was very nice, and you can find it in many, many churches right now. But this was the first example in the world, of course. And it was really a nice idea. And I can tell you, every time I take people here, and students here, and people here, and because of the size of the square and the orientation of the square in front of the cathedral, it's not really easy to see this asymmetry here. You really have to point it out to the people for them to see it. Thank you.